This week's guest on the Cowboy Up podcast is Stephen Hebrock. Stephen is a certified master hoof care professional who's been actively involved in the technical education of a wide range of subjects at several universities. Some of those universities include the University of Colorado, Denver, the University of Akron, and most recently at The Ohio State University. At The Ohio State University, Stephen taught hoof care and farriery, equine marketing, and facilities management, along with a number of other engineering and technical classes for nearly 20 years. During his tenure there, Stephen also completed his Master's of Science Engineering degree at the University of Wisconsin. Stephen has a lot to say about your horse and what your horse has got going on when it touches the ground. Welcome to the Cowboy Up podcast, brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and the Cowboy Spirit Radio Productions. The Cowboy Up podcast is where talk is all about the West, the spirit of the West, and the people and personalities that make up the West. My name is Steve Clausen, but the actual talent is sitting right across from me, Russell True. How are you doing today, Russell?
I'm good. Everything but my voice.
You got a frog in your voice, buddy.
Well, it was worse yesterday, but I am actually perfectly fine. I just don't feel well, which works better than when you feel really badly, but you don't seem like it. I'm getting excess sympathy.
Well, you've got that working for you, and that's a good thing. It kind of reminds me of when Henry Kissinger said, there can't be a crisis this week, my schedule is full. And your schedule is always full.
Yeah, he had a lot of interesting things to say.
He had a couple of interesting things to say, didn't you? Know, Russell, I'm rather excited about today's guest, and I've read his bio probably 6 times, and it's extremely intimidating because he's kind of like you. He's done just about everything, and I'm not even qualified to sit at this table. In fact, I may move back 4 or 5 feet just because I don't want to get in the middle of the glow here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the truth. My resume is short and sweet, dude rancher. You guys are the ones with the big resumes and the big degree list. You know, the truth is, and this is a true story, and this comes from Michael, so, you know, you always have to sort of give it a certain level of credibility. And I mean high credibility, because he speaks his mind, and sometimes inappropriately. So we were at the rodeo Wednesday, and my voice was not great, and so I was using a sound system to try and project a voice that kind of hurts when I speak loudly. And so every once in a while, with no explanation to me, the sound system would make this little sing-song noise, and every time I just shrugged because I had no idea. So as I was leaving the arena, Steve Hebrock here says to me, well, it's either you're just at the edge of the Bluetooth capabilities, and you maybe just, it kind of moves, even though you're not moving, it just kind of gets in and out of range, and it makes this notification. Or more likely, there's something else trying to get into this sound system. So I went back, and my brother said, oh, you know, I think that my phone was trying to get into the sound system. And I said, yeah, Steve told me that. And he goes, what is with that guy? He says he knows so much about so many things. And now my brother can also apply some sarcasm in life. And I said, no, Steve really does know this stuff. And he goes, no, I meant it this time. He really does.
Well, you know, Russell, that ties in because we're here to talk about the hoofs of horses. And this is from a guy who's got a degree in physics and sound recording technology, which kind of ties in with your Bluetooth analogy. And he's also a master of hoof care. I don't even know what to say. Steve, I appreciate you being here. Welcome.
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. I'm always thrilled to be here. I love the White Stallion. I've been, talking with Russell for 25 years now, so it feels like home to be here for me.
Well, I think that's awesome. And you told me a story before we started this about how when the two of you initially got to know one another, you kind of danced around a topic. I'd love to hear more about that because you're an expert in hoof care, and you were actually telling me stories about giraffes, which I want to hear more about that because that was pretty interesting. So I want to hear about the area that you and Russell used to dance around.
Well, my wife and I are what are called natural hoof care providers. So we don't put shoes on horses because, the science says that's not really the healthiest thing for the horse. Now, Russell in his situation is, I don't know what I would do if I was in his spot where I've got 150 horses on these rocks and I had to make a choice that was the safe choice. But Russell and I talk about a lot of things over the years, and I don't know, I always felt like we sort of avoided getting real specific about that because Russell puts shoes on and I don't. So the first time I did a podcast with Russell and Alan, we kind of got into that subject a little bit and found that we actually have a lot more commonality in our philosophy than what probably either of us, I can't speak for him, but certainly from my perspective, what I realized. We really have ideas about balance and things like that are very, very, very much the same. So that was really nice.
Yeah, I can believe that.
Yeah,
I can believe that. And I know the level of importance you give to this. And whenever I watch Russell put shoes on a horse, he keeps telling me he doesn't have the training to do this one thing and another. And I don't know how many horses have you put shoes on, Russell? He's got a little smirk on his face.
Well, I don't know, Steve Hebrock, not you, comes over often when I'm shoeing, and we just, it gives us an opportunity. I am just smart enough to be able to shoe a horse and talk to Steve at the same time. And so, we've shared a lot of time over at the shoeing area. I've shot a lot of horses. I mean, I learned at 21, and once I started going, and I could, the first horse I shod was my own. It took 6 hours. That's a real number. And, I was trying to be very precise, and as a result I was, but 6 hours. But it took a long time in my back, and you got to get in shoeing shape. But once I got there, then I not purposely or even very willingly, I became the ranch shoer. So for over 9 years, I shot everything that we had, and then I had other stuff, and we got more horses, and but I continue to shoe, and my wife Laura is a believer in my shoeing, and so she'll say, Russell, you got to shoe this horse, and she was looking at a horse to buy today, and the guy said, well, the horse, he's a roping horse, he sometimes gets a bit sore after I use him a lot. So there were pictures, so she zeroes in and she says, oh, Russell, look at this, you'll fix this. And so can I? Who knows? But yeah, I shoe a lot of horses. I still shoe, but pretty selectively.
Steve, I am told that anything you do 10,000 times, you are, at that point in time, you're an expert.
Yeah.
Would you say that Russell is an expert at putting shoes on horses?
Yes. And for one really outstanding reason, I think, because he has common sense and he's logical enough to understand what does and doesn't help the horse. So that sets him apart from most of these guys I encounter.
Yeah, they're just there to put shoes on horses. Russell's got an intent behind it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well said. What's weird is, and we're not talking about me. What drives me crazy, and I've said it on this podcast, is that there is very little disagreement on how a horse should be shod. And I look at these. I told Laura, I said, this horse she was looking at is a performance horse. So, they shoe these performance horses, these roping rodeo horses, barrel horses, et cetera, a certain way. And I think overall it's not a very good approach. And no one I ever talk to, when I go and talk to a shoer, I say, well, I want this done. And they, oh, yeah, oh, absolutely. That's, well, we all know that. And then they go do something else. And the principles I was taught by shoers and vets when I was in my 20s were they're sort of carved on Mount Rushmore type stuff. But yet, people say, oh, that's absolutely true, and then they go do something else. And the one thing that I do that, and Steve and I agree on this, but a lot of shoers, some shoers don't, is that you have to shoe a perpendicular, you got to create a perpendicular landing surface to the cannon bone, the bone structure, in other words. You can't measure your hoofs off the hairline, and we're getting a little esoteric for most of our listeners, so I'm sorry. But we really want a horse to land flat, period, end of story. And if they're not doing that, and Steve's taken 10,000 hours of footage of watching our horses walk in and out, because if they land flat, just like us, if we're landing on one side and rotating, we're going to get sore. And so a lot of this stuff is just
common sense,
and it's just basic principle stuff.
There's a sort of a joke out there. If you ask 10 farriers how to shoe a particular horse, you'll get at least 10 answers for that. And it goes to what Russell is alluding to here, is in principle, they all hold that these things are true. But in practice, it's, oh, no, you ought to do it like that. No, I want to do it like that, and so on. And for me, it's one of two issues that are major problems with the world of farriery today. And that first one has to do with cause and effect. You have to understand that you can't cause the horse to move better by deliberately not balancing the foot. Can't happen, period.
Okay.
Because if I took a horse and I turned him out, with feral horse out there running around somewhere between 12 to 30 miles every day of his life in very rough ground. Those numbers come from research. Some say 12, some say 30 miles every day of their life.
Depends on what the grazing's like.
Yes, exactly. Looking for food, looking for water. They land flat. They can't wear any other way. If you put my foot down like this every time, it's going to wear off. So I'm landing flat.
Okay.
That is what I think of as a minimal resistance, the most efficient movement possible for that horse. Nothing is standing in his way of moving properly. I can't come along as a hoof person and deliberately put something there that makes him land other than that and not expect that it's presenting resistance to good movement. So I like to say that we allow every horse to move its best. I don't cause them to move right. I allow them to move right by removing obstacles to movement.
Okay.
That's my job.
That makes sense. Years ago, I was fortunate to be able to attend day one of John Wooden's basketball camps.
Okay.
And this was a 5 days per week course, 8 hours a day, with most of them kids. The first hour of the 40-hour class, he spends teaching kids how to put their shoes on, because the only contact their feet have with that court is the shoe. And if it's not done right, there's going to be problems. You're going to cause ankle problems and knee problems and hip problems and low back problems. It kind of sounds like you're saying the same thing.
Well, it's very similar, but I want to throw out one other thing that distinguishes humans from horses in that respect. A human can do this. They have joints such that allow this kind of side-to-side movement, like your wrist or your ankle, to happen. A horse does not. The joints of a horse below the shoulder and below the hip all move basically as front to back hinges.
Okay.
And so anytime you've got something that is making the horse land on the side of their foot, you are putting torsion forces, torques, on joints in directions God never meant them to bend.
They're not designed for that.
They're not designed for that. So you hasten the arthritic process. That's the problem with doing that.
Okay.
So This movement is the cause of hoof form. That's the effect. I can't cause better movement down there. And that's one of the fundamental flaws in the thinking of most veterinarians and most farriers.
Okay, you use the term hoof form. Is that what you said?
Probably.
Yeah. What does it mean? What does it mean?
Well, the hoof form is just the shape, literally the form of the hoof.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we use as our ideal, a lot of people in the hoof care world talk about their model. And I don't like that because it refers usually, nearly always, to a physical form. What I can't do is look at the foot of a Mustang and say, I'm going to carve that shape into one of Russell's horses and he's going to be all set. It's not about that shape. It's about, my model is the more esoteric, more philosophical model of the forces of nature at work on the foot that cause the foot to look the way it does.
Okay. Yeah.
So by understanding the forces that necessarily are at work, I need to meet every foot where it is right now and head it in that direction. But I can't just take a shape and carve it onto every foot and think that's going to be healthy for that horse.
Okay. And I don't think this change can happen overnight, can it?
No, it can't. It can take, well, I'm going to say up to 2 years, we've found.
Wow.
From the time you start with some really lousy feet to really well-functioning, and then they look good. And the look good is the consequence of the good function. It's not the cause of the good function. It's the consequence of the good function.
It just shows health returning?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Now, it's interesting. You got your degree, your undergrad at State University of New York, a Bachelor's of Science in Music and Theory and Composition with sound recording technology. You've worked with some people that are fairly unknowns: Ella Fitzgerald, Dan Fogelberg, Harry Chapin, John Denver, Eddie Rabbit, Chris Christopher. People nobody's ever heard of.
No, those are yeah.
Okay, now
some of them probably a lot of people haven't heard of. But we are going to come back to that in just a minute. We're going to take a break.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Stephen and Steve, for showing a little bit of that cowboy spirit pressing on. Well, here we are. It's 25. In 2025, we're hopefully going to get some new beginnings in life, and good things are going to happen. We are going to thrive in 25. And that's part of what the cowboy spirit is all about. No matter how hard it's been or how difficult the path, we press on, we saddle up, we cowboy up. And I encourage you to do a part of that too in your own life and business. Again, my name is Stan Houston. I'm kind of the founder, creator, along with Russell and Alan and Lynn, who put together the Cowboy Up podcast over 5 seasons ago. And it's still going strong. I give leadership to a group of people who are a part of the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network, and it's our job and it's our privilege and pleasure to help people like you who would like to get involved in this new blossoming, blooming, busting new media called the podcast service, the podcast world. And so we would like to help you get involved in a program that might be for your business, for your friends, for your colleagues, for your good cause. So if you would like very, very much to be a part of the podcast world, we can make that happen for you too, just as we do for Russell True and the fine folks at the White Stallion Ranch and the True Ranch Connection. So why don't you reach out to me and say, Stan, what does it take to get me, my business, my good cause on the radio? Reach out to me at stanhouston@gmail.com, stanhouston@gmail.com. This is the year that you get on the air. Now, back to the program.
Okay, now, Steve, before we went to a break, we talked about some of the people that you've worked with, the Ella Fitzgerald, the Dan Fogelberg, Harry Chapin, Amy Grant, John Denver, Eddie Rabbit, and I meant to include Jerry Lee Lewis, and I didn't. So working with all these people from a sound point of view, I guess I can't figure out how that quite qualifies you to work with horses.
Well,
I mean, some of these probably are
Steve,
good horses. Maybe they even own horses.
it doesn't. It doesn't. I didn't grow up with horses. I grew up with horses across the street from me, but I didn't grow up.
Well, that's better because you get to look at them and you don't have to take care of them.
I didn't really have any interaction with horses. And when I lived in Colorado, when I was working in the recording business, I was living on a 3,000-acre ranch at a very famous recording studio up there. And they had some horses there. The owner was really into horses, and so I went for a ride a couple of times. But my big horse experience came when I went to the Van Cleef Ranch.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, in Montana.
Really?
Yeah.
Lazy K Bar.
Lazy K Bar, yeah, in about 1986. And that's quite a story. But what I discovered was I love horses.
Yeah.
I say I'm like a teenage girl, I love horses. They're fabulous animals. So my background is in engineering. I have a master's degree in engineering. And I didn't have any thought about horseshoes or feet or anything. I just thought, well, some horses need shoes and some don't. And I had bought in 93 my first horse, who was a Peruvian Paso. And Pasos are not typically shod horses. You cannot show a Paso in a Paso show wearing shoes. Why? Because shoes affect gait. And because Pasos are all about movement, they won't let you. The breed registry in those days, and I don't know now, but they used to send out a warning about horseshoers when you registered a horse, and they would say, these are unusual horses, not very common. Be careful of farriers, because if they don't really understand what they're doing, there's a good chance they'll screw up your horse. They'd try to stand up the horse, leave the heels too long, cut the toe too short, and make them look more like a quarter horse or a thoroughbred. Of course, that doesn't work because there's a joint there, but that was the theory. So being an engineer, I had met the guy who at that time was the head of the horseshoeing program at Montana State in Bozeman. I'd befriended him at the Van Cleef Ranch. He'd come out there and we became friends. And I called him up. His name is Tom Wolfe, like the author, and said, hey, Tom, I just bought a horse and I want to learn how to trim his feet myself. Can I do that? And he said the sort of famous words, well, it's not rocket science, and you are an engineer. Mm-hmm. So that started me on the path. That's how I got involved in this. And I started doing it, really just kind of winging it, and listening to farriers, listening to veterinarians, listening to horseshoers talk about these practically mystical properties of horseshoes in fixing problems and solving this. And the physics guy in me is going, it doesn't work that way. That can't be the case. And so that just kind of got me on this path.
Okay.
So I want to circle back. The Van Cleeves were, unfortunately, most of them are out of the business or gone now. But they were a huge name in dude ranching. Paul, number 1. Paul, number 2, Spike. Paul, number 3, Tack. Spike, Tack. Van Cleeves were all presidents of the dude ranchers. And I knew Paul III, Tack, he's gone now. And his sister Buckshot, she's gone. And then Barb, his sister, who's a pretty darn famous
photographer,
Western photographer. So I knew those folks. Who was there? Who was running that ranch in the 80s? You said 80s?
It was the Spike's wife was still alive, so she was there.
Barbara, I knew Barbara.
Barbara is the nominal head, and then not Barbara, but the other daughter that Carol, and Tack were there.
Yeah.
So there was Carol, Tack, and the mom, Barbara. Yeah.
Yeah, Barbara was classic.
Yeah.
Dude ranch. Matriarch.
It was a very different experience from the White Stallion, let me tell you. The dinners were fascinating because.
Well, you said it was kind of a story. We want to hear it.
Oh, I can. All right. You want to hear?
Absolutely.
This is my horse story. Okay, I'll tell you that.
But then tell us the dining room too.
Well, the dining room setup was you had young people, waiters, standing around against the wall, backs to the wall, around the room, never moving, never speaking to anyone. They did not want them interacting with the guests. Barbara, Carol, and Tack sat at their own table. Barbara had a little bell. When she wanted something, she'd pick up that bell, ring the bell, and one of these kids would come flying over to see what they wanted. So it was a very uptight kind of a dining room experience with not that good of food either. And anyway, so that was interesting. That was interesting. But you want to hear my
So
horse?
wait a minute, I want to go.
Oh, okay.
How did a guest get something? Did they have a bell?
Well, you could no, we didn't have any bells. You could kind of, excuse me, and drag a kid over to help you out. But they all looked pretty terrified because they were apparently told they're not to speak to the guests. They're not to interact with the guests.
Well, I'll just interject a little story. And I knew Barbara, I knew Barb, I knew Tack, but I knew them basically when they came here as guests, and they were, and I knew them from conventions, but we had two very good wranglers working for us, and they had worked for Tack and Carol, and they said, we're not allowed any fraternization, intra-staff fraternization. We're not allowed to drink, and we're not allowed to go to, what's the town there? Timber.
Big Sky?
No, it would be, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's jumped out of my head. But if we go into one of the bars are all instructed to call and tell on us for drinking at the bar. So they had to either, make friends at the bar or do it, out in the woods somewhere, because there were no drinking allowed anywhere, according to Van Cleve's view of Dude Ranch life, which would be a little unrealistic, probably.
Great riding, lovely place to ride, but just that uptight atmosphere.
Legendary range. So you have a horse story.
All right. So, as I said, my then wife decreed that we were going on this Dude Ranch vacation, and I had minimal riding experience till then. So the first day, we're down at the corral waiting for our horses. In comes a wrangler on this gigantic quarter horse. I mean, he's just a big stinking horse. Rides into the middle of the corral. The horse rears up on his hind legs and starts spinning in circles. People are running in every direction. The wrangler is yelling, "Clear out, clear out." So it's this panic scene here. The horse finally drops back down to all fours and bolts out of the corral with the wrangler on board, tearing off through the woods. Like, wow. A day, 2 days later maybe, the wrangler came into the dining room, that same wrangler, and he said, "I'm looking for somebody that would go out with me and round up some cows. I got to move some cows from one pasture to another." And I said, "I'll go." So he and I went out. He saddled up the horse I'd been riding. We went out. And he seemed to be real happy with I had never done this in my life, but,
Okay.
It's not rocket science.
So, nothing we do is rocket science.
No. So I helped him move the cows, very successful. So as we're riding back, and he's on this horse named Moose, he said, this is the last time you're going to be riding the horse you're on, because the horseshoers are coming in tomorrow, Tom Wolf, to shoe horses, and your horse is going to be out of commission. So this is it. And I said, "Well, who am I going to ride then?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. Maybe I'll put you on Moose." Yeah, right. So I went back to the ranch. I told my wife this story, and she couldn't believe it. And next morning, we went down to the corral to get our horses. My wife went out on an all-day ride with a friend of ours. She's gone. Pretty soon, there is nobody at the corral but me. And here comes the wrangler leading Moose, and he says, "Climb on." So I climbed on this horse. He climbs on a horse and he says, "Now we've got to run to catch up with the ride. So you ready?" And he took off, bolted out of the corral. My horse follows him. We are running at breakneck speed through this forest. There's a lot of trees around there. Forest. I'm doing this to avoid branches, holding on for dear life. I wasn't successful. I hit a tree. I hit a branch with my head. About this big around. Fortunately, it was dead, but it snapped off. There's this long branch and promptly caught in the string on my hat. So it's trailing behind me, whipping this horse in the butt as I'm hanging on for dear life, flying through the woods. Finally, The wrangler stops up there. I get my horse to a stop, get the thing out of my string, and never had a moment's trouble with that horse. I rode the horse the rest of the time I was there. He was fantastic. Never gave me a moment's trouble. So the last day we're out on a ride, last ride, got another wrangler in front of me, and she says, I have to tell you something. That horse has thrown every person that has climbed on him but you and that wrangler. You are the only two people that have ever managed to ride that horse.
Wow.
So anyway, my theory is that horse, he's flying through the woods and somebody's whipping him in the butt to go faster, and he thinks, man, this guy must be okay. That's my theory. But it was that trip and that experience that I decided I just love horses,
Well, that would do it. That would do it. So, okay, at the Ohio, because I think this is how I'm supposed to say it,
yes.
The Ohio State University.
Yes.
You taught hoof care and farriery and equine marketing and facilities management and a number of engineering and other technical classes.
Yes.
Again,
yes.
Yes. Sound to this. I mean,
I taught those three classes in the horse management program.
Okay.
In the engineering technology program, I taught analog electronics, digital electronics, computer-aided design, 2D and 3D computer-aided design, and traditional board drafting.
Okay.
In the general studies area, I taught Microsoft Office products, and then each one in individual classes, so Excel, Word, Access, I taught a multimedia design class and a web design class. So I taught 20-some classes for that school, and I also created online versions of nearly all of those classes.
I love it.
First person at OSU, as far as I know, to ever have anything offered online.
Fantastic. So, okay. Does your 3D and 2D engineering classes, does that coincide and interact with what you do with horses?
Well,
because they're both design, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it helps.
Is there an influence even?
Boy, I use those same sorts of skills in trying to look at movement in the horse. One of my pet projects, and I've been working on this since the late 90s, is, and I'll just describe where I am right now. I can put a sensor on each foot of the horse and see the movement, record the movement in 3 dimensions in real time on my computer.
Okay.
And then analyze that data and look at stride length and how much time the horse spends standing on a foot versus the flight of the foot. And
okay.
So on. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, they're kind of related.
Okay, because that's kind of what you do with the human gait.
Yes.
Because you've got push off, you've got landing.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And you how do you use that information?
Well, what my goal in starting this project many years ago was when they first came out with airbags, and they came out with what are called MEMS sensors, which is micro engineering systems. They're little tiny machined cantilevers on a chip, and that's what they use to detect. They're accelerometers to detect motion.
Okay.
So when you hit somebody, that motion sets off the airbag in the car, and I thought I can apply this to horses. So I actually went to a pretty well-known company in the horse world and said, hey, I've got this whole portfolio of product ideas. So we go through the whole, the non-disclosure agreements, and I met with them, and they said, well, we love all these ideas. We passed these all around the marketing department. They're fantastic ideas, and that was one of the ideas. But we're not smart enough to support a product like this, so we're going to have to turn it down, but we'd like the right of first refusal on anything else you do.
Oh, okay.
So I'm lost. Well, the accelerometer and this,
accelerometer.
What were you trying to achieve with the horse?
Sorry, yes. When a horse is sound, a horse moves very symmetrically. And in fact, you can, if you were to put a light on the back of the horse up at the withers and watch that motion from the side, when he's at the trot, it will trace a sine wave. It's very symmetrical movement. When the horse is lame, there is asymmetry in the timing of the gait. So the horse spends more time on a lame leg, and then the interval to the flight phase to the next landing of that foot is shorter. Just imagine you got a rock in your shoe, and then you throw it over and step down again, so on and so forth. I wanted an inexpensive way for the average horse owner to be able to detect not only when is a horse lame, but where is the lameness. So this will identify what leg is taking the shorter stride. As you know, working with vets, it can be very hard for anybody to pick out exactly where a horse is lame.
It's really hard.
Yes.
And I will tell
Yes.
you, they're not trained that in vet school.
They're not.
I'm sure they take classes on it, but they don't.
I don't know, but
well, I'm assuming they do, but it's so experience based. And there was a vet here, never used him here actually, never even met him. He's gone now, but he was famous because he would have you trot your horse away from him, and he would turn away.
Oh.
And he would do it with sound.
Yes, yes.
And I get that, but I don't get that because you still got to know which foot's hitting. But I think as a person who's dealt with a lot of lameness and a lot of different vets over the years because your vet isn't available, and like our vet, Dr. Seamus, late stage of his career, loads of experience, but you bring these young vets in, I got to tell you. So wouldn't that be a great diagnostic tool for a vet?
It's even
Forget
better
the
than that.
homeowner.
Yes, it's even better than that. It's because as the horse improves, they're moving towards symmetrical movement again. So this lets you quantify the asymmetry and say, last week he had this timing of his stride, but this week he's gotten better, or that's not working, we're barking up the wrong tree. Yes, I think it's a fabulous device, and it's been just a matter of time and money of me trying to get this thing into a marketable form.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Because I know you've got some products that you've created.
Yeah.
Don't you have a belt and
yes,
and
I
you've
have
got
my belt. Yeah.
the
boot
measuring
gauge,
boot measuring tool.
Talk about those things.
Well, they're just I'm always designing things, So a few years ago, I came up with this design because horse jewelry is typically horse shoes.
So no one can see it, so explain it.
I know. So it's supposed to be evocative of the hoof print of a barefooted horse.
Right, which it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's just one of the things.
It would be like a graphic design of a hoof
print
looking at the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I came up with that, and then I have this boot gauge. I got tired of fumbling around with a ruler or a tape measure trying to measure horses' feet to get a good fit with hoof boots. And I don't know if you're familiar with hoof boots, Steve. But
because I read your website, I'm a little bit more familiar than I would otherwise have been.
Make sure that everybody listening.
Yeah.
Well, as an alternative to a shoe, there are a number now of boot manufacturers, and you can actually put this boot, it's sort of analogous to a sneaker for you and me, on the horse's foot, and covers the bottom of the foot, the entire bottom, protects them from sharp rocks. It's a good tool.
It also is really, we use them for lamenesses and problems.
Yes, for soaking feet, there's all kinds of uses for them. But it's hard to measure for them. And you need a good intimate fit. If you're really out there riding a lot, you want that to fit right or you're going to lose the boot. And then nobody's happy. So I made a device that measures those feet for that.
Okay.
So I can measure a foot now in under 10 seconds easily. Accurately. And I have another device that I sell quite a few of. I call it a heel balance gauge, and it's just a little an acrylic plate with a base on it at 90 degrees to it with laser etched lines on it. And it allows you to see that the heel height on a horse is about the same, because I started getting calls from students saying, oh, this horse is lame and I'm balancing the foot how you told me to balance the foot. And so I'd say, send me some photos. And these horses all had what we call sheared heels, where one heel has gotten like this and the other heel is like this up to the hairline.
Okay.
So it's landing right, but the foot, imagine taking the foot in your hands and twisting it, torquing it like that. That's what they've created. So you need this device. This is useful to see that actual difference in height, and you can correct the trimming then to get the foot straight.
Wow.
But understand, I'm a product designer. That's my engineering career, is solving problems for people in design.
And these are expensive problems, and they're important problems.
Well, some of them are important problems. Some of them are, I get asked. I just did a device last year for a company that wanted a measuring device for cutting circles, and it's an electronic device, and it provides all the measurements and allows you to compensate for the bit diameter and all of these things. So you don't have to do any thinking. You just dial in the number and you can cut it. So,
okay.
Yeah, things like that. I've done some crazy projects. I did a fish counter one time for a guy with a fish business, a tropical fish business, and he wanted a way to non-contact count fish out for an order. And so this ended up using a siphon tube and an optoelectric sensor, and the fish would swim through the tube. You'd siphon them through the tube, and as they passed the sensor, it would count the fish, so you could count out an order.
Wow.
I did an underwater communication system for SeaWorld, communicating with the whales using symbols that lit up underwater. I've done a lot of crazy projects.
Wow. Okay, we're coming to the end of our time. How do people find out more about you? Because I have so enjoyed learning about you.
Oh, well, thank you, Steve. Yeah. Well, they can go. What we're doing these days here at the White Stallion is we have our Enlightened Equine workshops for horse owners. And so this is a subject we're very passionate about, my wife and I, and we're offering a 4-day class in hoof care here.
Okay.
And the other thing, if I can just mention it quickly,
of course.
We mentioned the cause and effect, but the other one is people don't realize, they're not taught, that other things affect hoof form and function, like diet, stressors, and the environment itself. So this is a comprehensive hoof care program. We teach you about all of those things and how they relate to healthy feet.
Interesting.
Yeah. So enlightenedequineworkshops.com.
Okay, and we're going to have you back, because when we get you to come back, I want you to talk about not just horses but other animals, because we never got to the story about the giraffes.
No.
So we'll do that next time. Is that fair?
That's fair, and I'm always happy to be here.
I appreciate that, Steve. Thank you very much. This was great.
So I just want to be clear, the belt is really cool, the boot measuring is important to people. The clinics doing natural, it's all at Enlightened
Equine Workshops or Enlightened Equine. I also have a blog called enlightenedequine.com. It's got 80 some articles I've written on it about mostly hoof care.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Enlightened Equine, Steve Hebrock is where they need to go.
Exactly. That'll work.
And they can get these products too.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Super.
Steve?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And then we're also going to, everybody likes to hear about celebrities, good and bad, so next time we'll
We'll hit a few of those.
We'll hit a few of those, okay?
Squeeze a Jerry Lee Lewis story out of you. There's got to be a story there.
Indeed.
I'm sure his reputation was well earned. So, all right, thanks. Enlightened Equine, Steve Hebrock.
You know, Russell, listening to Steve, it was really interesting for me, because this is a man who is deeply, deeply into horses. He didn't start there. He did not start there. And it kind of should give people hope that the place where you start is not necessarily the place you have to end up. And he's a living example of that. You look at all the stars that he worked with, the singers and Jerry Lee Lewis and Debbie Reynolds and people like that. And now he really doesn't care about those folks so much as he does about a particular horse and how a horse walks and how the horse lives its life. And it's just kind of a remarkable conversation from my point of view.
Well, I think it's true. I mean, I as many hours as I've talked to Steve while I'm shoeing horses and over at the shoeing area, I didn't know about this program that he's created that determines the lack of symmetry to diagnose lameness, and I just think that's such a giant possibility, and it in the broader arena, it makes me think about how we've become such a world of specialists, because his skill set, which is pretty broad but also very engineering and tech based, I couldn't even begin. It would never happen if it required my attention. So it's just what a great marriage of technology and application if he can get it to market.
It was a great podcast.
Yeah, no, it always surprises me.
Well, that's a wrap, folks, and thank you very much for joining us. We are the Cowboy Up Podcast, coming to you from the historic White Stallion Ranch in Tucson, Arizona. And the weather's kind of cold out there for many of you. Well, this might be a good opportunity to say this year will be a little bit different. We're going to finally have that dude ranch, that guest ranch, that Western experience, both for perhaps our family, our friends, and maybe even a business retreat. We would very much like to show you just how you can do that. So reach out to us at whitestallion.com, whitestallion.com. We'll be there to help you make it a new and great and wonderful new year as you perhaps create an experience for your inner cowboys for you and your family. Again, thanks to all the people who make it possible. We're grateful to Russell True, to Steve Clausen, and Steve Hebrock, who made the program what it all is today. And we thank you. Reach out to us at the Cowboy Up Podcast at gmail.com. That's the Cowboy Up Podcast at gmail.com. All the best and blessings to you. Walk tall, ride safe, and do good work. Till next time, bye for now.